Welcome to Jones Gap State Park. I'm Ranger Tim, and today we're going to be out exploring and making some discoveries in a mountain cove forest. So if you're ready, let's head on up the trail. Oh, did you hear that? Listen out to the forest. You hear there's a bird singing out there. You'll hear a lot of other sounds out there in the background. One of the things that scientists do, including myself, is as we're out making observations, we do what are known as listening stations. And it's exactly as the name sounds. It's an area that we go to and we listen out for different sounds, especially when we're doing bird counts or bird surveys. So what we're going to do is I'm going to have you to help me do a listening station. So I'm going to put my clipboard down. And to help us be able to hear the sounds a little bit better, I have the advantage of having this hat on that captures the sound. Oh, heard another one. What I want you to do is kind of take your hands, hold them open, go ahead and close them, then open them back up just a little bit so you make them somewhat like the letter C. Then once you come and put them behind your ears and just cup them like this. Yeah, go ahead and do that. Cup them just like this. All right, for 30 seconds, and that'll be our timer, I want you to listen for the different sounds that we're hearing. Ready? Go. You hear that bird up here? That might be a bird sound that you recognize from your neighborhood. It's a bird of the forest, but it also will be in neighborhood areas as well. It's one of the ones we call a name sayer. So it tells you its name happens to be a jay, a blue jay. And it just continuously over and over goes, jay, jay, jay. Much better than I do it. All right, great job listening. What have you heard a bird out there? Heard one off in the background, singing away, making a call that I happen to recognize. Birds have calls and they have songs. Songs are the things we normally think of as they're very, very musical, so you may hear a bird going. A call is usually maybe one or two notes, maybe like that. So, difference between calls and songs for a bird. But I was hearing a song as well as a call note in the background. What other sounds did you hear? Did you hear the sound of the river running behind us? Got a little bit of wind blowing through the forest, so you may have picked up on a little bit of the sound of the wind. Oh wow, look what we have over here. There's actually two of them. Wow. Look at here. Got one of our little forest snails on the log here. I'm actually going to reach over and pick up another one that's here. It was on the forest floor. Look, you can see they're almost the same, aren't they? Look at that. Put them in there. I used to think that all the snails that I found out in the forest were all forest snails. They were all the same. And I'd see little bitty ones and I thought, well, they're just tiny. They haven't grown up yet. Turns out that there are many, many different species of snails that are in our forest area. To date, we have already identified 13 different types of snails that live here in our forest. Some of them are found in this cove forest where it's really high in moisture and cool, and other times we might find them between here and the ridge line, but still in a really moist area. What they're doing on this log is you'll notice they're on a lot of moss in this area. What they're doing is as they move across that, they have a an adaptation in their mouth called a radula. R-A-D-U-L-A, radula. It's kind of hard like their shell, and as they go along, they can scrape with that radula and remove this plant material off the log, and then take that energy that came from the sun, that the moss has used in order to grow itself, and then this primary consumer can take it in and take that energy and use it for itself. When these are consumed, many times they're consumed alive by predators, but many times after they're already dead, that shell on there is very important for them, especially to animals in the forest that lay eggs. What types of animals could you infer might be in a forest that lay eggs? We heard one earlier today, yeah. Now, birds will actually take these, chomp them up, and then use that calcium that's inside of there to actually form the egg for, or the layer, the shell for their little eggs. Pretty cool. All right, let's take a little closer look at one of our plants growing a little closer to the forest floor. We've looked at the beech drops earlier, which were down on the very bottom layer. By the way, the very bottom layer is called the forest floor. And that's usually where you're going to have these green plants with a very fleshy stem, very different from a woody stem like that of a tree. And that's one of the things I noted right away on this, was that it's got doesn't have a woody stem on it, sort of very flexible, if you would. So what else do you notice about this organism? What about the color? What color is it? Does it have any features or structures that you might recognize, like a leaf or a flower or a feather? Maybe the leaves look feathery. So we're going to take our observations of this organism, and we're going to take a look and compare it to, just pan over to our observation sheet, our identification sheet. You may have noted I've been carrying a clipboard as we've been hiking through the forest. This is one of the tools that scientists use, or different types of keys. And this particular key is set up so that the plants that are at the top represent our plants that are at the highest level. The canopy level, those make up our trees that are the highest. Those that are under the canopy, the understory. And those that are a little bit lower, they still have a woody stem, but they're lower. That's the shrub layer. Some people call it a bush layer, but the shrub layer. And then our bottom layer with the green fleshy leaves, or stems, the green fleshy stems, are going to be our herbaceous level, sometimes called the herb or the forb layer. So look on there and see if you recognize that plant. See if you can identify it. Great. Hopefully you're able to recognize it as this plant on the bottom. That is a Christmas fern. The Christmas fern is one of our evergreen ferns that grows here on the forest floor in this cove forest in the Blue Ridge Mountains of South Carolina. All right, here is one of the trees that grows here in the mountains of South Carolina. It's one of our evergreens. In other words, it means it keeps part of its foliage, part of its leaves, in this case needles, on year round. So let's see if we might be able to identify this evergreen of the forest here in the mountains of South Carolina. Once again, we're going to look for patterns and shapes. We're going to look for things that might help us to be able to identify it on the observation sheet in just a moment, okay? All right, we've made our observations of the evergreen tree. Look on our worksheet to see if you might be able to identify it. Remember to do the identification. We're just comparing, seeing how the tree looks like one of the plants on our identification sheet, but also contrasting. How does it look different? In this case, the tree happens to be in the understory where it is, but it actually gets tall enough to reach the canopy layer. And if you remember, our canopy species are going to be up here for our trees. So is it the beech tree with these wide leaves and smooth bark, or is it this tree with the fine small needles and a little bit more textured bark? Yeah, that's right. This is the eastern hemlock tree. Right? The eastern hemlock tree is being affected by a non-native species of insect that came into our area. It came into our mountains of South Carolina in the late 1990s along the Chattooga River and made its way over to the mountain bridge here at Jones Gap by 2003. And as you look at this tree, you'll notice there are not many needles left on there. The hemlock woolly adelgid actually takes part of the sap, the nutrients away from the tree to a point that it begins to die back. These hemlock trees, and once they're in the canopy, provide a lot of shade. As we talked about earlier, the loss of that shade, creating the canopy gap, causes an increase in the temperatures below. More direct sunlight can come in. And being along the middle Saluda River, it actually helps to keep the water temperature a little bit cooler. So scientists are inferring or predicting that the water temperature could actually increase if we lose this tree completely. So you can see how a tree can affect things even in the river as well as in the forest. All right, we've come to an area in the forest where we have a very large tree that you'll notice has holes in it. And if you think about a hole in your tooth, what would you call that? Yeah, cavity. You call it the same thing in a tree. This is a tree cavity. And there are many different types of animals that use these tree cavities as a home. What animals can you think of that might live here in a cove forest in the Blue Ridge Mountains of South Carolina that might live inside of a tree cavity? Yeah, things like woodpeckers and owls, many different types, maybe small mammals. Also, surprisingly enough, very large mammals can live in here. Recent bear research was done in the Great Smoky Mountains, within the Blue Ridge Mountains. Bear biologists determined that over 50% of black bears actually go up trees that have cavities, climb inside, go down inside, and spend the winter there, those that den. And usually it's the female that's going to den, especially if she's going to give young, give birth that year. This wouldn't work so well. Big cavity up top, as you see, but it's also air conditioned. It's got a lot of cavities down near the bottom. So let's go in and take a look and see if we can find anything in the cavities or even on the trunk of the tree itself. You see there's a lot of sticks in there. I would guess that it's probably from human activity, more so than a wild animal putting it in there, but you never know. Oh, look on the outside, the entrance to this one cavity that's out here. Nice silky spider web in there. Maybe the spider might be inside of there. There's certainly evidence of a spider utilizing, if not the cavity, at least the tree bark very close by. It's going around. Oh, cool, look what we got up here. A little caterpillar up there. Really fuzzy looking. And in general, not always. I try to never say always and never say never. But usually the fuzzy or hairy looking caterpillars are those of moths. So this is one of the moth caterpillars on the outside of the tree. It's moving a little bit fast, but if we pan down a little bit, we might pick up on another insect. A little bit further down, right in here, look right there. Moving pretty quick. You might recognize this little guy, you may have it out in your own yard. A little black ant. Many different species of ants out in our forest, but it's utilizing this tree, and maybe even that cavity as well. Let's see what else might be out here. We're going around the tree. Of course, remember these animals, we're going to use that adaptation of camouflage. And we're trying to blend in so they're not seen very easily. So we're going to look really closely. Oh wow, here's one that's almost invisible to us, other than its body. Its body sort of has a golden brown color to it. Its legs are a little bit larger, and it just moved as I got a little bit closer. Let's see where that went. All right. What we're going to do, we're going to catch this little guy and see if we can't identify it, all right? Okay, I'm holding the little animal that we caught by one of his 8 legs, and so that he can't get away from us. You may be able to tell below my thumb, or slightly above it there, the opposite side from where the body is, that leg is much longer than the others. The little animal uses that second pair of legs back from the head as kind of feelers. So it's using that to feel out what's in front of them. So you notice it's moving a lot more than the other legs are. Make out a little bit that the body's somewhat rounded. Okay. All right, now I'm going to just take a look back at that identification sheet that we had earlier and see if you might be able to find that animal on there. And if you identified it as being the one in the bottom left there, that's being a daddy longleg. You may have seen this before. Daddy longlegs look like spiders, and a lot of people think they are, but they're actually not. They're actually closely related to things like ticks and mites. They're actually within a group known as the harvestmen. Nice find, and now we know what it was. It's a daddy longleg. Awesome job. Wow. Looks a little different in this part of the forest, doesn't it? You look up towards the canopy. Remember, the canopy is the highest layer within our forest here in this mountain cove forest. Notice there's a big opening. Scientists would call that a gap in the canopy. And you can see before us this very large tree that has fallen. This tree came down during a high wind event associated with a tropical storm that moved through about 4 years ago, bringing high winds into the area. And this large tree with this really wide top acted like a sail on a ship. It caught all that wind, and that root system wasn't able to hold it up and blew it over. And as a result of that, it opened it up, and so now you have a more clear opening to the sky. How do you think that might affect the amount of sunlight that's able to reach the forest floor? Do you think it would have increased the amount of sunlight or decreased the amount of sunlight that could reach the forest floor? Yeah, by opening that canopy up, that canopy gap allows more sunlight to be able to reach the forest floor. And as more sunlight comes in, and that opening, that new space that's opened up, gets filled in by what we call pioneer species. Pioneers are those who came first. And in the case of plants, most habitats, when you start out early, there's a lot of sunlight until a canopy is produced and you get sunlight. So those that come in first, you're going to find those sun-loving plants that are going to come in first out there. Things like red maple trees and tulip poplar trees, sometimes known as yellow poplar trees. This forest is always changing, and as this forest changes and its abiotic factors change, in this case the amount of sunlight, it's going to affect who can and who cannot live in those areas based upon their adaptations, that inherited ability to be able to survive in those surroundings. In this case, those shade-loving organisms are not in this area right now. They're waiting for the canopy to come back. But those sun-loving organisms, those that are adapted to be in direct sunlight, they're now beginning to populate this area and inhabit this area.